Okay, thank you very much, Alan. And now we will take you to Suj Lee, who will present this amazing webinar. Take it away, Suj.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank CFILC and Yo Disabled and Proud for inviting me to do this webinar, and also to, welcome and thank all of you for coming and listening in and participating in discussing this topic. So I wanted to just start by kind of introducing myself. So my name is Suj Lee. I'm a staff attorney in the Bay Area office of Disability Rights California. So I just wanted to ask right now, how many of the people in the room have ever heard of Disability Rights California before? If you could just, hit the button that Alan was mentioning. Okay. It looks like none of you. All right. So Disability Rights California is a protection and advocacy organization for the state of California. We provide advocacy and legal services for people with all kinds of disabilities who are living in the state of California. And we have offices located throughout the state, in the Bay Area, and also in Sacramento, San Diego, Fresno, LA, and actually we have other offices, other staff that are located throughout the state. And so I've been invited here today to discuss the topic of advocating for a bully-free world. And so I just kind of wanted to start out if anybody wanted to chime in. How many of you have either experienced or witnessed bullying in your past? Well, it looks like we got some check marks for sure. So I understand that bullying is a really, really kind of hot topic in the news right now, and there have been, a lot of news kind of going out regarding this topic pretty recently, with regard to people with disabilities, but also for kind of LGBT issues. And so there have been some recent changes, particularly in California law. And so because a lot of them did come into effect in July of this year, this is a really good opportunity to kind of come and visit, the law and kind of figure out, and discuss what people's rights are, particularly if you're, as we're talking about individuals with disabilities. And so our focus today is going to be kind of advocacy through the law. So learning about the law, what are your rights to be free of bullying and harassment. But I also wanted to save some time at the end to kind of discuss, what are some advocacy avenues that, that I think are certainly really worth pursuing that kind of go beyond the law. The law is great, but in some ways there's a lot of limitations to it. How can we work to expand the law and then, to really create a world that is more accepting, more integrated, more tolerant, and bully-free? So just to kind of talk about our format today, I know that a lot of you might have things to say, and I would love to hear from you if you guys have any questions or any comments. And so I have kind of built into the presentation today a couple of breaks, 3 breaks that we're going to take so that we'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions and and let me know if you're confused about anything, and also to hear some comments and feedback from you guys. So if you could hold any of those questions or comments for those periods, I would very much appreciate it. So anyway, there's a picture up on the slide right now. It's a picture of legal scales, which of course represents.
Can I interrupt you for one moment? The people that are on the phone, if you would hit *6 to mute your lines, then we won't have any interference noise. And when you want to speak, just hit *6 again. Thanks.
Okay. So let's start with the law. So what laws protect the rights of people with disabilities and protect them against things like discrimination, harassment, bullying, hate crime, And so, there's some images up on the screen. There's a logo for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also a little logo that's supposed to indicate IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So obviously there are quite a few laws under the federal law and also under state law that prohibit discrimination, harassment, and bullying and hate crimes against people with disabilities. But in addition to that, there are kind of educational laws having to do with special education and accommodations in education, which can also provide additional services and supports for individuals with disabilities so that they can access education, and in the case of students who receive special education, so that they are able to receive free and appropriate public education, or otherwise known as FAPE. So I'm going to kind of start with bullying and pretty much the most kind of recent, some of the more recent developments in California law as it pertains to bullying. And so I kind of wanted to ask a question to the room. How many people have heard of Seth's Law in the room? Okay, it looks like we have a couple people who've heard of Seth's Law, and there's some hands raised. Wonderful. Okay, so basically there have been a lot of recent developments in California law to make kind of more protective laws as it, specifically regarding bullying. And one of these is Seth's Law, which was named after a young man in California who committed suicide after years and years of bullying because he was gay. And so, not only were LGBT groups really, really big on kind of pushing these laws through, but also groups like Disabled and Proud, in order to kind of make sure that those laws included students with disabilities. So what does bullying mean under California law? Under California law, bullying is really talks about conduct, and this conduct can include things like harassment, threats, intimidation, stalking, physical violence, sexual violence or sexual harassment, theft of private property or destruction of private property, public humiliation, and also kind of retaliation. And it's kind of these acts that occur, by students that target other students or other students, depending on the situation. So I know that people have concerns about kind of what do we do when you have an adult at school, like a teacher or a staff member who's kind of engaging in this type of behavior. And I do want to say that this is something that that I definitely will discuss later in the presentation, and so I don't want you to think that I'm only kind of spending this time right now to kind of talk about what is the official definition of bullying under the law. So I want to kind of make sure that people know that I understand that that is a concern, and that it is something that I am going to kind of discuss a little bit later in the presentation. And so basically, under the definition, bullying is this kind of conduct that is severe and pervasive. And so there's kind of an implied meaning there, which is that it has to be something that's pretty harsh, not pretty harsh, but if it kind of has no effect on you, then maybe it's not bullying. And also pervasive kind of implies that it's something that happens repeatedly or on a regular basis. And the other kind of prong to bullying is that it has certain effects on the student. It can be kind of fear of harm, and that can include harm to yourself personally or harm to your property or belongings. Some of the effects can include health effects, and of course these can include physical injuries, but also kind of mental effects like kind of emotional harm, such as depression and anxiety, etc. Also includes things that have an effect on your academic performance. For example, if it has an effect on your grades or just kind of how you do at school, also on your attendance. So say that you're so terrorized by bullying that you're tardy to class or you avoid going to class because of bullying. That's obviously an effect on your academic performance. And this, of course, also extends to participation in other school activities. One thing that the law specifically does say is that cyberbullying is included in this definition of bullying. So bullying through any electronic means, which includes emails, texts, Facebook, things like that. So what are the things that schools can do about bullying under California law? Obviously, one of the things that schools and school districts can do to address bullying is discipline of bullying, so suspensions or expulsions and things like that. But one thing that kind of that Seth's law really did was that it really kind of makes school districts beef up their anti-bullying policies and to create stronger policies against bullying. And so what is a school anti-bullying policy required to have? And essentially the policy must prohibit discrimination, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, particularly if it's motivated by a prejudice against certain kind of categories or groups of people, which include people with disabilities, but also things like race, gender, and sexual orientation. This policy should be made public. It should be made available to students, to parents, and to teachers. And the policy must create a complaint and investigation process. This process should have a timeline for complaints to be identified and investigated. And the timeline really should not take longer than 60 days. And it also, the complaint process should make sure that people who are making complaints about bullying are protected from retaliation. Another really important thing that's getting included into school anti-bullying policies is a requirement for school staff to intervene when they see bullying if they feel like it's safe for them to do so. And so that's kind of a new thing in terms of the anti-bullying policies. And then the last of the kind of really new rules in California regarding bullying is that students who are the victims of bullying in schools can get priority for an interdistrict transfer. And so either, it really kind of depends on how the school district transfer works, but you either get a priority or special consideration when you request an interdistrict transfer because you've been bullied. Usually it means that either your home district or the school district that you want to transfer into must determine that you have been bullied. And so the process that you should really follow is to try to go through the complaint process. And then once you go through the complaint process through your home school district, if your home school district finds that you have been bullied, then at that point, you can say, look, I need to get priority in order to be transferred to a different district because I've been bullied at this school. Alternatively, that means if you don't have a finding that you've been bullied after you've issued a complaint, you can take kind of those documents in that complaint to the district into which you want to transfer, and then ask them for a finding that you've been bullied, and then to approve your request to be transferred to their district. One thing to kind of keep in mind, if you are a student that has an individualized education plan, an IEP, or a 504 plan, make sure that if you are going to be transferring districts that you ask for IEP or a 504 plan meeting to just make sure that the transition goes as smoothly as possible and to make sure that you're not getting any kind of gap, delay, or loss of any kind of services, supports. and accommodation. So I know I gave you guys a lot of information, so I did want to take an opportunity right now to take questions about the information that I've been putting out there.
You're on the phone and have a question, hit *6 to unmute your line and go ahead.
Anybody?
It looks like nobody wants to speak up.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll go ahead and move on, and there will be another kind of break. So please feel free if you think of something that you want to ask about to raise your hand the next round. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about anti-discrimination laws. There are anti-discrimination laws that exist under both federal law and California law. Today I'm really going to be focusing on federal laws, and so you may have heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act and and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But there's also California law that encompasses anti-discrimination and prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Now, how does this apply when you're talking about bullying? Well, it applies because, under the ADA and under Section 504 of the Rehab Act and under California law, people with disabilities have the right to have equal access to education, and accordingly, these laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability, because discrimination prevents people from being able to access services like education. And so when you are being harassed on the basis of your disability, courts have recognized that when you're being harassed because of disability, that this is creating what's kind of legally called as a hostile environment. In the case of education, a hostile learning environment. And that when you're exposed to a hostile learning environment, that essentially means that you are being discriminated against. Because you are being prevented from kind of going to school and to take advantage and benefit from school. And so I wanted to take a moment right now to compare bullying as it's kind of described and defined under California law with disability harassment. And they are slightly different, but there are ways in which obviously bullying can be disability harassment. And when bullying and disability harassment kind of overlap, those anti-discrimination laws such as the ADA and and Section 504 start to apply in those situations. So you'll see I kind of have it as a side-by-side list of kind of what bullying is and then disability harassment is. And in a lot of ways, disability harassment is a little bit broader, is a little bit more kind of open than bullying is. For example, when you're talking about bullying, it really kind of restricts it to acts by a student against other students. In comparison, disability harassment can be acts by anyone, and this of course includes teachers and other adults at the schools. Bullying is behavior or conduct that is directed at other students or another student. Disability harassment, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have to be directed at a student or students. It can be directed at anybody. And actually, it also includes conduct that's not directed at any one specific person. So, for example, if it's a little bit more broad in which, what if you're kind of making a joke that, isn't necessarily directed or targeted at another person or even at, offending or bullying that person, but it makes a person with a disability who's in the room feel uncomfortable, feel harassed, feel threatened, then that's disability harassment, even if it's not bullying. The definition for bullying in California law kind of says that the conduct has to be severe and pervasive. Under disability harassment, even a single act can be disability harassment. So the next point is kind of where disability harassment is a little bit more narrow and focused than bullying, which is that bullying does not necessarily have to be motivated by bias against disability. Bullying happens for a lot of reasons. It could be because you hang out with the wrong crowd of, wrong group of people, or the not cool group of people, or kind of where you live, or things that you say. Bullying can be much more broad in that way. On the other hand, with disability harassment, it really only covers conduct that is motivated by a bias or by prejudice against disability. And so the reason for the bullying or the reason why a person is targeted is disability related. So what are school districts' responsibilities under anti-discrimination laws? Schools and school districts are public entities. In a lot of cases, they're government entities. And so they have a duty to prevent disability discrimination. And so when you're talking about teachers and school staff who are employees of a school or the school district, teachers and school staff are essentially kind of an extension of the school district, and therefore they share in this responsibility to prevent discrimination against disability. So when you have a teacher or other school staff who are engaging in bullying or harassment of students against students with disabilities, or if they know disability-based bullying is going on and they don't do anything about it, if they ignore it, then the teacher, because the teacher and by extension the school district are violating laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act and 504 of the Rehab Act and other discrimination laws. And so schools have an obligation to address disability harassment that they know about, that they actually witnessed and see and that they're told about, or even things that they should have known about, that if they were doing what they were supposed to be doing as educators, as teachers, as administrators, that the disability harassment or bullying should have come to their attention, they're still responsible for addressing it and making sure that it gets dealt with and that it doesn't happen, and that they do what they can to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. So I'm going to turn to hate crime law, which I feel like is kind of a provocative area to kind of talk about when you're talking about bullying. But there are hate crime laws that can apply in certain situations when you're talking about bullying. So there's both state and federal laws which prohibit hate crimes. And hate crimes have to do with violent crimes. And so when I talk about violent crimes, I'm talking about things like assault, battery, sexual crime, sexual assault, robbery. And all of these are things that are illegal just by themselves. If you go out and you beat up somebody, or if you go out and you steal or rob somebody's house, that's obviously already illegal under criminal law. What hate crime legislation does is that it imposes additional penalties when these crimes are motivated by bias against particular protected groups, which include people with disabilities, but also other categories such as race, gender, religion, and sexual orientation. Generally, as a general rule, just hurtful words are not enough to kind of raise something to the level of a hate crime. However, there are very limited circumstances where the speech can constitute a hate crime, and it's called intimidation. And so if a person is threatening an individual with a disability, and they have the ability at that moment to carry out that threat, and the person with a disability has fear that a crime, that violence is going to be committed against them, then that can actually rise to the level of a hate crime. The other thing with hate crime is that damages may be available. Civil damages in a lawsuit may be available against an individual who commits hate crime. So if you decide to sue, you may be able to get damages. But again, these same kind of rules apply about what constitutes a hate crime. It has to be a violent crime. There must be an actual threat if it's just speech. And so the last kind of law I'm going to talk about is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I'm sorry, there's actually a typo. I just realized there should be education between disabilities and act, so I apologize for the typo. But I do kind of want to ask a question to the group, which is anybody here a student who has an IEP, an individualized education plan, or had an IEP when they were in school? Okay, well, it looks like I have a couple people who've said yes to my question. More than a couple people. All right. So Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is really the law that kind of makes it possible for people to take part in special education, to be eligible for special education, and to have an individualized education plan, an IEP. And so how does that relate to bullying? Well, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act says that students who are eligible for special education law have the right to receive free and appropriate public education, FAPE, from their school districts. And the school districts have an obligation to provide these students with FAPE. And so essentially the Federal Department of Education has said in kind of advisory letters that if a student who has an IEP, who's a special education student, is being harassed on the basis of his disability, that can interfere with and prevent that student from being able to access free and appropriate public education. And so school districts who aren't dealing with bullying or aren't dealing with disability harassment may be failing in their obligation to provide FAPE, to provide free and appropriate public education. And so another thing that kind of is really useful out of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that there are any student that has a disability who has an IEP, their IEP plan, their education plan is supposed to be individualized for that person's need. And so if you are a student who's been subjected to bullying, you might have additional needs that need to be addressed through the IEP and can be addressed through the IEP. So you can create an individualized plan that's designed to provide goals, services, and supports so that the school district can be providing FAPE so that you can benefit from your education. And these services can be anything from support, like additional counseling, from from the school psychologist or a teacher or a school counselor, so that you have somebody to go to when you're being bullied. It can be things like learning new skills, learning self-advocacy skills, learning social skills so that you can identify when you're being bullied and how to address bullying and who to tell when you're being bullied. It can even be broader to say, to maybe educate your teachers or other people around you at school about your disability so that they can be able to better address your needs for services and supports to address kind of the bullying situation. And this is really important because bullying can have a really profound impact on a student's ability to benefit from education. If a student is missing school or is tardy at school because they are because they're being bullied, that's impacting education. If their performance or their grades are suffering because of bullying, that's obviously something that is impacting that individual's ability to access and benefit from education. And so the IEP really can be used as a tool to kind of talk about some of these things and to come to the IEP meeting and come up with a plan to kind of address some of these issues. And so it looks like there's a hand raised.
There's a hand from April Bryant. Oh no, Alex Singh and April Bryant.
Okay. So that's actually perfect timing because it's time for questions. All right, so number 3. All right, so I guess Alex, you seem like you're number 1 on the list. Go ahead.
Alex, you just have to hit the microphone button at the very bottom.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So when you audit the IEP and when you're out sick, and how the teachers are supposed to work with you in terms of getting work in and things like that. Those are the same thing when you're in college too. So I know you don't really have like an IEP when you're at the university or community college level. Does it work there too?
Well, you wouldn't have an IEP. And actually, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I should see. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So IEPs really kind of cover people, through either when they graduate from high school or they receive a certificate of completion. However, if you are a student who's in college, you don't necessarily have Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but you still have the ADA and you still have 504 of the Rehab Act. And so, what you may want to do is ask for certain accommodations that might help support you in terms of dealing with bullying at school. And, I think you would have to spend some time thinking about kind of what kind of accommodations you might ask for. And obviously, there's a requirement for these accommodations to be reasonable. But, you might want to talk to your Students with Disabilities coordinator, to talk about whether there are some accommodations or additional kind of supports that you might be able to access through your college. Is that helpful? Okay. Okay. Well, then maybe we can move on to the next question. So I guess April Bryant.
April, you can either turn your microphone on at the very bottom or type your question into the chat window. You might want to move on to the third question and then come back.
Sure. Let's move on to CJ, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Bulatau.
Okay, and he's his question in the chat: why don't they teach about people with disabilities in school?
Okay. Well, I think that. April, I will move on to your question. I just saw it, so if you don't mind, I'm going to answer CJ first. So that's something that we that I did want to discuss later on, and I think it is an important avenue for advocacy, either locally with your own schools or with your own school district, or even throughout the state. But in terms of kind of why, I totally agree that they should teach more about people with disabilities in school, that people should learn about disability history and the disability rights movement. And I think it might be a really, really important and kind of next step to making schools a little bit more accepting and integrated and really tolerant. So I totally agree with you. Why don't they? And so I'm going to move on to April's question, which is being robbed a hate crime? And yes, because if you're being robbed, it usually means that it can be, and it really depends on as for any hate crime, it really depends on what is the motivation of the person committing the crime. If they are robbing you because they think, as a person with a disability, you're more vulnerable, or they, have a prejudice against people with disabilities, then yes, being robbed can constitute a hate crime. Okay. All right. So.
Excuse me. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Jerry Holzbauer, and
Hi, Jerry.
I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but anyways, I'm not really that familiar with California laws, but my question is, and this is kind of, why isn't teasing, mocking, making fun of people, students with disabilities considered outright harassment rather than using the term bullying? And the reason I'm asking that is because conduct regarding disability harassment can result in litigation, where I don't know about California, but in most other states, if you just commit bullying, there may not be any legal way for parents or students to make a legal complaint. And I think very strongly that having that legal component behind this kind of activity will waken up school staff, school principals, and school district administrators a lot quicker than it was just labeled bullying.
No, I think that's a very, very important point, Jerry, which is that, a lot of times when you're talking about bullying, if it is bullying that's based on disability, then it can be disability harassment. And so, to the extent that there are laws in California that have been designed to be specifically targeted towards bullying, you are correct in saying it's really not the only kind of law. It's not the only tool in our toolbox. There are kind of federal laws and even state laws that protect protect students, protect individuals with with disabilities from discriminatory harassment. And so, I'm not saying, my recommendation is to kind of say both, because, not only in California, and of course I'm not very familiar with the laws where you live in Milwaukee, but in California, because we have these new laws that are kind of involved with bullying, I think you can, make an argument that you're being bullied, but it really doesn't prevent you from, at the exact same time, kind of alleging that you are also being discriminated against and harassed on the basis of disability. And so, in this presentation, I really do kind of want to encourage people to understand that because different words, kind of have different legal meanings, you might think of it as bullying, think of something that's happening to you as bullying, but to try to kind of also think about it in terms of a greater concept of your rights as an individual with disabilities to be free of discrimination and disability harassment. So, so I completely agree with you.
Well, and I don't want to, but as I understand it, any kind of taunting, teasing, threatening, whatever, if it's someone who's doing that because or due to that person, adult or child or student, because of that person's disability, then it is harassment, and it isn't bullying necessarily. Because, then it's automatically harassment, just like, just like with the other protected classes, like sex or gender, race, religion, and so forth. I rarely ever hear people talking about at any level, about sexual bullying or racial bullying. It's almost inevitably always called sexual harassment or racial harassment. And I guess I'm just trying to make a point. I think harassment, because these are legal, they are illegal acts that are taking place in schools and the workplace and so forth. So why not just use the term disability harassment in the same way that most people use these other kinds of harassment? Okay, and again, I think it's much more powerful for parents and people, students who may be harassed because of their disability, to stop that kind of conduct, as I said before. Because, school staff, teachers, principals, teacher aides do not want to be accused of illegal harassment.
Right. Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think your point is very well taken, and that certainly the words kind of discrimination, disability harassment have a certain kind of legal power, and we should definitely take advantage of that when we're kind of advocating. Okay, so thank you so much for your questions and your comments, Jerry. So, I do kind of want to move on in our presentation.
We also have one more question from CAL Berkeley Youth Mentor Program. Their question was, when was the disability harassment law made?
So if we're talking about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, I believe it was 1992. And then if you're talking about 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, it was, I believe, 1970. Oh goodness, 6. I might be right. I might be wrong. Is it 78?
No, 73.
1973. Okay, I apologize. I'm obviously not good on dates, but and then various California laws have been passed since those kind of laws. All right, so I'm going to talk about kind of so how do we use these laws that we've been discussing to advocate for your rights in terms of school bullying. So step one is always to kind of notify your school district. And it's really best to make sure that this happens in writing so that you can keep a copy and keep it as evidence if you need it later on, so that you can show that the district had actual, a letter that was notifying them that something was happening. You want to, so basically something that I have done here in the next slide is, and I believe that you guys received it in the zip packet at the beginning of the presentation, but I have prepared a template letter to kind of a principal or to the school district of, that you can use to fill out and in order to notify the school district that bullying or disability harassment is going on. And you'll see kind of from the template it has these kind of blocks where you can put in your specific individualized information so that you can really customize it to your own situation and to your own needs. And you'll notice if, I know you probably don't have time to do it right now, but you'll notice as you read through, it'll say kind of, it'll ask you to kind of describe things, and it's really, really important to describe situations in as much detail as you can remember and to be as specific as possible. Another thing that this letter does at the very end, and obviously if you aren't a student who has an IEP or a 504, you can omit it, but if you feel that it's appropriate, it includes a request for an IEP or 504 meeting so that you can discuss services, supports, and accommodations that you might need related to bullying or related to disability harassment. And so if you are going to be attending an IEP or 504 plan, students do have the right to attend their own IEP or 504 plan meeting to discuss your education plan or to discuss accommodations. And actually when students turn 16, school districts are required to invite the student to the IEP meeting. You don't have to go, but it's a really good opportunity to advocate for yourself and to kind of discuss what your educational needs are from your own perspective. And so when you're talking about a 504 plan, you're talking about the reasonable accommodations that you need at school. If you're talking about an IEP, you're going to be talking about at this meeting goals, services, and supports that you need. And these can include goals, services, and supports and accommodations that can help you feel safer at school and to address bullying or disability harassment. And like I said, I did mention some of the things that you can kind of advocate in favor of getting through an IEP or 504 plan, which include kind of support, so counseling, and this can even include counseling for parents or education for parents, education for school staff about your disability and your needs. It can be about kind of learning skills like self-advocacy or kind of social skills or whatever it is that you feel like you need. I mean, another thing that you can ask for in the IEP is increased supervision or increased kind of shadowing by an adult. And obviously there might be a place for this type of service or support, but if you are going to be asking for something like this, please keep in mind that please try not to create a situation that is more kind of restrictive and prevents you from being able to kind of to really kind of take advantage of school and keeps you kind of segregated or isolated or anything like that. Now, kind of what is the next step? Like, what if you go and you complain to the school and you ask them for their anti-bullying policy and you tell them what's happening to you. You ask them to investigate, and nothing's happening. Or in the alternative, what about if they do an investigation and they issue a decision and you disagree with it? You feel like it's really not going to be addressing the disability harassment or the bullying. You can file a complaint to either the California Department of Education Office of Equal Opportunity or to the Federal Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. And generally, you would not file a complaint with these government agencies against a student. It really is designed to make sure that the school districts are abiding by their obligation to do what they're supposed to in terms of preventing discrimination and addressing disability harassment. And so you don't want to do this first before you tell the school. What you want to do is you really want to tell the school, give them a chance to do the right thing, to investigate and to issue a decision. And so you should kind of wait, really, before you go to either the California Department of Education or the Federal Department of Education, because if you do that, there's a possibility that they're going to be like, okay, well, you had an opportunity to complain down below. You should go back and do that. But if after 60 days you complain to the school, you complain to your principal or to the school district, and either nothing happens, or they retaliate against you, or you feel like they're retaliating against you, or 60 days pass and nothing happens, and you're trying to get a hold of them and they're not talking to you, then you can really go to these agencies and file a complaint. But you do have to be kind of aware of deadlines. When you're talking about that, you have 180 days to file a complaint with these agencies, although there is a way to get an extension if you go beyond the 180 days. And on the other hand, if you are in a situation where you are disagreeing with the district's investigation or decision and you plan to appeal that decision to either the Department of Education in California, the Office of Equal Opportunity, then you really only have 15 days, which isn't a very long time. So just be aware of the deadline. Again, you might be able to get an extension if you can kind of explain the circumstances. But generally, it's very helpful to kind of keep within the timeline. So in a similar way to the template letter that I developed and prepared and brought to you guys, I've done two, one of which is for the California Department of Education Office of Equal Opportunity, and the other is for the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. And there are, I put them up on the screen just so that you can kind of see them, but they are in your packets. And the address on this is for the California Office of Civil Rights. For the U.S. Department of Education, if you're in a different state, then you might have to go to either Washington, D.C. or to the one that's kind of more close by in your state, just to kind of let you guys know. But it's a similar type of format where we have little blocks where you can fill in the date and your name and to really kind of customize it for your own situation and for your own circumstances. So I have a couple tips in terms of when you're kind of advocating through these types of letters and filing complaints with either the U.S. Department of Education or with the California Department of Education, or you're communicating with your school district. And I think the biggest tip that I can kind of give you is that it's really helpful to communicate in writing, because that way you have a record of everything. Make sure that you keep copies of any letters that you send or get back, any forms, IP documents, anything. It's just so helpful to build that record of evidence. and to make sure that it's in writing, because there's so many times when you're talking to the school district on the phone, and then when you come back later, everything they say is different. And so it's really nice to make sure that you have that in writing, because then you have a record of it. The second tip that I have is that details are important. There's a difference between, saying, I was bullied or I was treated, a certain way, as opposed to saying, on May 4th, these students, names John C., and stole my book bag, called me, these names, and you can, put out the specific names that they called you. There was a witness there. The teacher was standing right there. And say the teacher's name, what happened. I told the principal about it. So just make sure that these details are really, really are included in the writing, and so that that becomes part of your evidence, part of the record. And it really does help not only the school, if the school is performing an investigation, but later on, if you ever get into a situation where you decide to file a complaint with the Department of Education in California or for the U.S., that things are really kind of well documented, so that will help their investigation. And the last thing that I kind of wanted to make sure to include as a tip is to be aware of deadlines, be aware of your timelines, because like I said, once you complain, the school district should be getting back to you within 60 days. And then if you want to complain about something, to file a complaint with California Department of Education or to the U.S. Department of Education, there is a 180-day, which is basically a 6-month kind of timeline that you're looking at. And I do also want to say, in terms of the federal, the U.S. Department of Education and the California Department of Education, there really is nothing that prevents you from filing complaints with both of them at the same time. So that option is still available to you. So anyway, right now is a good time to pause for questions. So if there's anybody
hello,
this
is Jerry Hofstall. You did a real good job of outlining the complaint procedure. I just want to give you and the audience, if you choose to file a formal complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, I was told that by a high official in the Department of Justice that you should include a copy of your formal complaint and send it to the U.S. Attorney General in the Department of Justice as well, because the Department of Justice, at least from what I was told, is seriously looking at disability harassment, but they need more, documentation to back up what they think is going on. So parents who file formal complaints should also CC a copy of the complaint to the U.S. Attorney General in the Department of Justice.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Jerry. That's very helpful to know that the Attorney General is looking at these cases and trying to investigate what's going on. So.
Well, and then Department of Justice is much different than has a lot more authority, let's say, than the Department of Education to kind of,
All right. Thank you very much. It looks like we have another hand up. CJ Bulato.
And CJ's question is, does my IEP follow me to college?
No, unfortunately, your IEP does not follow you to college. Unfortunately, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act really kind of only encompasses students who, until they either graduate from high school or receive a certificate of completion. And so once you go to college, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, kind of no longer applies. But that being said, there are kind of other laws that you might be able to take advantage of in terms of getting reasonable accommodations in school when you're in college. So like the ADA or the 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, actually more specifically 504 of the Rehabilitation Act allows for reasonable accommodations through school. So I know that a lot of students who are transitioning from high school to college, it's a very, very different kind of process from high school if you have an IEP where you have, a team meeting and things like that. And you discuss kind of goals and services and supports. It's not going to be like that when you move to college. But that being said, that doesn't mean that accommodations wouldn't be available once you move on from high school. Okay. If there's no further questions, I wanted to kind of get to the section at the end of my presentation, which I promised we would get to at the very beginning, which is what are other ways to advocate in favor of a bully-free world. And one thing that you might have noticed about some of the laws that I have been talking about in terms of bullying and harassment based on disabilities is that it really kind of is very reactive. It only kind of responds to bullying or to harassment after it's occurred. So what are some other ways to kind of advocate for a bully-free world? And I kind of wanted to put some ideas out there, and I'd really like for all of you to take an opportunity to think about what are some ideas that you can think of in terms of creating a world that is more accepting and tolerant and inclusive for people with disabilities. But here are a handful of my ideas. And actually they're just not mine specifically, but I think they are kind of an important part of disability rights and disability advocacy as it's always been conceived and understood and talked about. So finding and creating support networks for yourself. Finding support for yourself, identifying what kind of support you need and asking for it is a form of self-advocacy. And this is something that you can do formally. So through, for example, your IEP with, asking for counseling or, talking to teachers or counselors at school. Or it can be kind of, taking part in clubs or organizations at school, or even creating clubs and organizations at school. I think one of the things that was really kind of important in terms of advocacy as it relates to the LGBT communities in high school is the formation of gay-straight alliances in schools. And so, you might want to think about creating a similar type of things in your own schools and in your own communities to help support and advocate for yourselves and each other, at school, at home, in your community. But finding and creating support networks is obviously something that you can also do in an informal way. Support can come from your friends and from your family. You can even find it online. There are a lot of support groups for individuals who are being bullied. And so kind of learning to kind of recognize when you need that support and how to ask that support and learning how to do that is, I think, a really important form of self-advocacy. My next idea is eliminating stigma. And so stigma is a judgment that people or society place on particular groups, such as shame or disrespect. And obviously, disability is a group that has a lot of stigma attached to it in our society. And so there's a big move, I think, right now to try to eliminate that stigma amongst people, to really change the way people think about and treat individuals with disabilities. And you might be familiar with some of these projects. Kind of one of the big ones that has been in the news and out on YouTube and stuff recently is the R word, is to stop the use of the R word. But also to kind of encourage the use of people first language and make sure that people are respected as individuals in their own right, who have a voice and who shouldn't be treated or thought of as being different or thought of negatively just because they are people who have a disability. And this is something that somebody brought up as a question earlier, which I think is really important, which is make disability issues part of education. This is something that you can advocate for at the level of your own school or at your own school district, but also maybe in favor of making it part of a school curriculum in the state of California. But the idea is that to take an opportunity to learn about and teach others about disability history and disability rights. And I think I saw that Yo Disabled and Proud in the past has done a webinar previously about this issue, about trying to make disability education a part of everybody's education. And then more inclusion in schools. And I really feel like a school that is more integrated has the potential to be a more tolerant school. And this is because when students are segregated from the rest of a school because they are students who have disabilities, that communicates a message to people that individuals with disabilities are different and that they can and should be treated differently. And so we really want to end segregation of people with disabilities in schools and really in society in general. Because ultimately when people have a better understanding of something, they're more capable of being sympathetic and tolerant to those people or to those ideas. And obviously, a lot of the ideas that I've been kind of mentioning are related to each other. I mean, this is related to the idea of kind of disability rights education in school. It's also related to the idea of stigma. But I think it's an important message and one that's been a part of the disability rights movement from the beginning, which is that people with disabilities have the right to live a life that is, amongst, society, without any judgment and without any, different treatment, so that they are able to kind of equally access, the services and, the community as people who don't have disabilities. So I wanted to take a moment right now to to kind of point out, some self-advocacy groups that are out there that you might already be familiar with, or maybe want to familiarize yourself with. Of course, I had to mention Yo Disabled and Proud, who've been doing a lot of good work and have been really out there in order to advocate against bullying, against individuals with disabilities. But I have a couple more that I wanted to mention. One, the next one that it's on the list is Youth in Mind, and it's a pretty relatively kind of new organization, and it really kind of is a peer and self-advocacy organization for youth with mental health disabilities in California. And they have a really cool project right now which is called Stomp Out Stigma, which is targeted at eliminating stigma against mental health disability. And as part of this project, they have these this like Twitter feed, and people have these signs next to them that say, my name is Jane and I have bipolar disorder, or my name is Bill and I hear voices. And it's this way for people to be really out and proud and to really own their disability, their mental health disability, and to say that just because I have a mental health disability, doesn't mean that I'm different or scary. And so I think it's a really, really interesting project. Another couple things I wanted to mention, I've already mentioned the R word, but also the Pacer Center National Bullying Prevention Project, which is online, and it really is kind of focused on preventing bullying against individuals with developmental disabilities. So I kind of wanted to open it up to you guys for a little discussion. I want to hear from you. What have you done in the past to advocate for yourself against bullying or against harassment? Or are there any other ideas that you guys can think of in terms of creating a bully-free world? So hopefully you can see some hands.
Briefly, I mean, for me personally, it was being able to recognize what harassment was and how I was personally being harassed. I think until a personal awareness takes place, I think it's very hard to become a self-advocate or even to advocate for other people. But I think so. I think it's often people who are harassed, and this just isn't people with disabilities, but all forms of harassment. They are humiliated, they are shamed, and it's very hard for them to open up and address or talk about what has been going on. So I think it just takes a certain amount of courage just to be able to open up and talk and tell their stories to people who will listen. And then after that, for me it was very liberating and freeing. And after that, that's when I became not just advocating for myself, but I started advocating for all kinds of other people with disabilities who have been harassed also. So, and to try to make aware the powers that be, and that goes all over the place, in the workplace, in schools, and that it is a form of illegal discrimination to be harassed because of your disability.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for sharing. I mean, I think you're right. It is very difficult to self-advocate, and it does take a lot of bravery and courage, and and so I think that it's very important to try to take that first step of kind of reaching out to people. So thank you for your comment.
Alex Singh wrote, for an assignment in university, I gave a speech on the social identity disability. Part of that, I touched on harassment and bullying, and I showed 2 videos. One video showed the perspective of a able-bodied person who is being bullied by disabled to show a different world. The second video was from the TV show What Would You Do? It was about 2 deaf women who were not hired at a cafe because they were deaf.
Yeah, that's really great, and it seems like you you really kind of were working to advocate for yourself and to really educate people about disability and about kind of discrimination against individuals with disabilities and how people don't really think about it that way. There's so many people who say a lot of words that are really not people first language without giving a second thought to how hurtful it might be. And so to really change people's perspectives about people with disabilities and how they're treated, I think is really great. Is there anybody else who would like to contribute? I'd love to hear from you guys. Okay, well, it looks like we've come to the end of our presentation. So anyway, I have a slide up right now with our Disability Rights California logo, and it has our toll-free number. It's 1-800-776-5746, and it also has our website up right now, www.disabilityrights.ca.org. There's a lot of really great resources on the website, and if you're ever having any issues, if you would like some advice or help on advocating for yourself, please feel free to contact us and ask us questions and learn more about this about anything related to kind of your disability related kind of issues. Let's see. So,
excuse me, I'm pushing out the package again that has the handouts and the slides. So if you didn't receive them at the beginning, if you did receive them at the beginning, just click no, and if you haven't received them, click yes and save them to your computer.
Okay. Let's see. So I think that kind of concludes my presentation today. I want to thank CFILC and Yo Disabled and Proud for inviting me to speak. I really hope that you guys found it helpful and that you learned something and walk away with some more information and feel empowered by what you learned today. If you look, I believe Alan has sent out a link to our survey sites. I would really like to hear from you, hear some feedback about this training, and maybe if you have other kind of trainings you'd like to see in the future from Disability Rights California, you could certainly mention that in there. It's an online site, so we'd love to hear from you. In terms of my credentials, Amy, I'm an attorney here at the Bay Area office of the Disability Rights California organization. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate talk.